Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
Wells.
We appreciate all the support on our recent content, and before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OPT Podcast for more content and updates.
All right, so we're back at it again with another off-season series of videos to review, and we got a couple teams coming up again. Philadelphia 76ers, New Orleans Pelicans. We'll start off with the Philadelphia 76ers.
Oh boy.
Because that team was an absolute mess last year. Again, not necessarily all their fault because you can't blame, injuries on individual people, if you know what I mean, right? Like, it's not their fault. But I will say this. I do remember a year ago, back when they signed Paul George, you were actually not as high on them signing Paul George as I think the general consensus was, if I'm not mistaken, because you kind of, not that you necessarily thought that this was going to happen, but I think you were just a little bit lower on what he was going to do for Philly. Also, it was a 4-year deal. And so if it doesn't work out, given his age, you got a problem, right? Because they still have 3 years left on that deal. And he ended up having probably the worst season that he's had. I mean, other than, I guess, maybe his first couple of years when he was like a 19, 20, 21-year-old. So, he ended up last year 16, 5-4. I remember him having like a couple of good games. But by and large, not a great season from him. Way down from the year before where he was an all-star, right, for the Clippers. And that, with him playing 41 games, combined with Joel Embiid, right, also not playing a ton, and when he played, didn't look like himself. Only played in 19 games, averaged 24, 8, 4.5 assists, which for any normal player would sound like they're really good numbers. But for him, by and large, those are pretty low numbers across the board, right? That's, again, one of his worst seasons outside of, I guess his quote-unquote rookie year, right, where he still averaged 20 points, 8 rebounds, 2 assists, and he was a rookie. But even then, career lows in terms of efficiency and everything else. And, he couldn't really move. He couldn't really defend like he normally does, because, again, like, obviously, you don't want him in space getting switched on to defending guards, but, like, he can still protect the rim. He can still move well for a guy his size. But, again, only 19 games from him, 41 games from Paul George. And then, I guess Tyrese Maxey, right, was kind of looked at as another one of their bright spots going in. He only played in 52 games. Now, some of that was also because what's the point? Everyone else is hurt. Season was over pretty quickly. And, they needed to try to be as bad as possible so they could keep their draft pick, which they were able to do. And we'll talk about who they chose. So, all in all, if last year was probably one of the worst versions of how that team could have gone, right? Even people who were really low on Philly, I don't think could have expected them to be that bad, right? They were 24-58. But, at the very least, it wasn't the complete worst case scenario because they were able to keep their draft pick, and they took VJ Edgecombe out of Baylor, who I think we're all pretty high on, right? Especially from an athlete defensive perspective, right? The offense still probably needs to be a work in progress, right? But, I think worst case scenario, backdoor cutter, lob threat, attacking closeouts, and just giving Philly more athleticism because they don't have that, right? They're not a very athletic team. It was mostly an older team last year. And, I think he'll fit in along with what they have. They do have a lot of guards, though, right? Because, you have Maxey, right, who's the best guard on the team, obviously. Then they took VJ Edgecombe in the draft. But then you still have Jared McCain, who they drafted, a year ago, who, before he got hurt and tore his meniscus, looked like he might potentially win Rookie of the Year. He started the season off not playing a whole lot. But then once some of the other guys went out due to injury, he came in and played great. He gave them 15 a game, right? Shot 46 from the field, 40 from 3 almost, on 6 3-point attempts a game. So I thought he was really good for them last year. And we both liked him in the draft too. So Philly, by and large, in the draft recently has done pretty well. Yeah, funny enough, you're still waiting on Quentin Grimes. They have not signed him to a contract yet. My expectation is that he'll be back on some type of deal. Don't know what it'll be. And then that's another guy to round out the guard rotation, right? And he was great for them, while the team was horrible, right? But he was able to get a lot of, on-ball chops and, again, shot the ball really well, got a lot of opportunities. Probably won't have quite as many opportunities next year if everybody's healthy. But either way, it'll be okay because, his role as a player anyways, right, is mostly going to be mostly off ball. But again, maybe being able to attack closeouts and defending, right? He's not really a guy that you want being like an on-ball scorer if you're trying to be like a really good team, right? He can maybe do it in a pinch, and now he's added on to that. But either way, the best version of him in this league probably won't be that.
Mm-hmm.
But they also drafted Janai Broom, right? Who, again, I was a guy that I guess seemingly online made a lot of headlines just because it seemed like, he didn't seem like that much of an athlete. But again, plays hard, physical guy. When we saw him in the summer league, right, he took some outside shots and looked pretty good in there. So worst case scenario, he should be able to come in and just be a guy who can play X amount of minutes, limited minutes, and just kind of be a change of pace type of player. Again, how much will he play? Well, it depends on the health of a lot of these guys. Because again, this is a team that is relying on a couple of guys that are not very reliable in terms of getting you through the regular season. So there's a world where he might play a ton.
Yeah.
I like a lot of their young players, honestly, right? Like even an Adem Bona, right? Which we also saw him in the summer league as well, right? Just again as a athletic, energy big, lob threat, runs the floor, blocks shots. Again, I mean, they have some decent young players. Again, a lot of them will be optimized the best alongside their stars. It's just how much of their stars going to play. And that's kind of the question there. Oubre's back. He's still with the team. Drummond opted into his player option, so he's still with the team. Eric Gordon, still with the team. Kyle Lowry. So they mostly ran it back, right? They didn't really make a lot of changes. It's just they brought in some guys in the draft, right? So there's like a couple of guys, like Reggie Jackson, who's not on the team. Jalen Hood-Schifino's not on the team anymore, right? Lonnie Walker's not there. But, again, in terms of what they did this offseason, I like what they did in the draft. It's just my concern is, so I would give them a B for this offseason in terms of the grade. It's just my concern is, as I've mentioned multiple times, is I just don't think you can really bank on those guys being healthy enough to be able to get you through the regular season and the playoffs, because that's the tricky part, right? Like, what's been the primary consistent thing that we've seen from all the championship teams the last several years, right? Usually their best player is going to play a decent amount of games, right? They may have some injury issues over the course of the regular season as a team, but they're usually relatively healthy. And they're probably going to win at least 50 plus, at least 50 games, right? I mean, like, we haven't really had a champion win under 50 games, right? And they've still been a top 3 seed. It just stinks because we know Philly, the best version of it, is a really good team. And especially this year where the East is not going to run through Boston, right? Or Indiana. They could really make some noise if everything pans out. But even with Embiid, we still don't know when he's going to be healthy. I don't even think he's really been doing any on-court activities yet, right? Which, is unfortunate, kind of sad because, we're already almost at the end of August. So if he's still not ready now, I don't know. It's kind of hard to make the case that he's going to be ready by training camp and, potentially by the time the season starts. Either way, you'll still probably have to manage his minutes and his workload. The nice thing is they do have a lot of players that offensively can get their own, and play off of him, and whatnot. So the idea in theory, which we thought would happen last year, was that, which is why we took the over on them last year, was, okay, even if Embiid misses 15, 20 games or whatever, they still have Maxey, they still have Paul George, so they should be okay. And that wasn't the case because those guys missed a bunch of time too. So this is one of the trickiest teams to evaluate, especially once we get into their over-unders. Like I said, I like a number of the players on the roster. Losing Yabusele stinks because one weakness I do think of the roster, since we, because we're going to try to talk about the roster as is, I do think one weakness is you just don't have a lot of guys that are fours. Now, they did replace Yabusele with Trendon Watford, who came over from Brooklyn. He's had, a lot of unique roles placed on him in Brooklyn, right? Because I've seen games where they use him almost like a point guard, where he's like on the ball, playing downhill and getting to his spots. But then I've also seen other games where he plays more like a big, right? Where he's setting screens and he's rolling, or he's, popping out onto the perimeter. So he's a very versatile player. So maybe in some ways he might be able to replicate some of what Yabusele does. He's just not as big, right? So that's, so that's one thing where the physicality probably isn't going to be quite as consistent as you got with Yabusele, who was very good for this year, right? He was actually one of their bright spots. And it's not like Watford's a skinny guy. He's just, just Yabusele is huge. So I think Watford's like 6'9", 240 or something like that, or at least that's listed as. So that's a good, at least replacement. But that's my only problem is that when you look at their roster, they're kind of small outside of Embiid. So that's kind of the only concern where there may be nights where, hey, if you're playing a bigger team, they might get cooked, they might get beaten on the boards a decent amount, right? Or, if Embiid's not there to protect the rim, you might have some issues there defensively. But offensively, like I said, if everybody's healthy and it all pans out, I do think that there is, there's some good things here. There's a lot of players, like I said, that I like on this roster, especially from an offensive standpoint. I just can't trust that they're going to be able to stay healthy over the course of the season. So I'm just not a big believer in this team, which is unfortunate because, again, Embiid, when he's healthy, is one of the best players in the league. And the last time he was healthy over the course of an NBA season, right, he was, playing at an MVP level, right? He was averaging 35 a game, right? And with 11 rebounds and almost 6 assists, right? And he looked like, had he been healthy, he could have won a second MVP. But unfortunately, that's not the world we live in, right? He only played 39 games that year. He did come back for the playoffs, right? Because that was when they lost to the Knicks in the first round. He tried, but it just wasn't enough. And then, last year he only played 19 games, and he's already 30. So he's already kind of at the point where, how much longer is he going to be able to hold up? I hope he can, but I just don't necessarily know if I can expect him to. I would think he would play more than 19 games. So I'm at least hopeful that there may be a positive regression in terms of him playing a little bit more than last year, and getting closer to looking like what he might have been. I just don't know if we're going to get that, unfortunately. Like, I don't think we're going to be able to get the version 2 seasons ago where, like I said, he was putting up 35 and 12 and 6. Yeah. I don't think we're going to necessarily get that. And I don't really think that we're going to get that enough to be able to have them get through the season and the playoffs. And that's, like I said, that stinks because, like I said, when he's healthy, he is one of the best players in the league. It's just now we're at a point where I don't think we're going to see it as much. And again, he's already at 30. So I don't know if we're going to continue to see it at this point because it just seems like his body can't hold up.
Yeah, I agree with you. Pretty much with everything that you said. I would also give them a B, right? They stunk last year. You already talked about why. Obviously health issues all across the board, right? It doesn't even, just end with guys like Embiid and Paul George, right? Like you already talked about it. Jared McCain missed, pretty much the entire season off of that injury as well, and Tyrese Maxey as well. So no need to really delve into that. But I think the highlight of, their offseason was adding to the young core of guys, right? While also not really losing a whole lot, right? You lost Yabusele. Okay, sure. That, I think people kind of forecasted that based on the type of season that he had, right? He turned out to be super valuable, and we knew that they probably weren't going to be able to bring him back, especially if a team offered more, right? So bringing in a guy like VJ Edgecombe, like we got to keep in mind, this is a top 3 pick. It's not, it's not 5, 6, not, middle or late lottery. This is top 3. So I think there's going to be some high expectations. I think he was the right pick, right? A lot of people wanted Ace Bailey to go there, but I think this is the right move because you're picking a guy who I think is willing to do the little things on this roster, but also has the potential to be, I'm not going to say like a superstar, but I would say a two-way star, a guy who can impact the game on both ends of the floor, especially if his jumper, pans out. So for them to get him at the cost of having a bad season due to injuries, I think that's fair. I can't really, like you said, penalize them for injuries and stuff like that. So adding VJ Edgecombe, not really losing a whole lot, is great. I think it's really hard to grade this team. I think we had an issue grading them last year, right? Because you got the top free agent in Paul George last year, but at the same time, look at what that got you this year, right? Like it netted you the 3rd pick, but was it really worth it because you're shilling out all this money to guys who aren't really going to be able to play a whole lot of time? So that's, I think, the concern is it's going to always come down to injuries with this team. Saw it coming from a mile away, and you never really want, this stuff to kind of happen, right? Because at the end of the day, like you talked about, Joel Embiid is, a top 3, top 2 player in the league when fully healthy. He can dominate the mid-range. He can put so much rim pressure on the other team. So there's just so much that he can do on both ends of the floor. But, if he's not fully healthy, fully mobile, then I don't, like you said, I don't think we're going to be able to see that version of him because, yeah, he was pretty good in the paint like last year when healthy. But it was just the mid range and the other areas where, he just didn't really have the finesse, the quick first step, stuff like that just, is a part of his game and makes him who he is. So that kind of scares me. But I am happy that they added on to the young core because I'm telling you, I think the young core is pretty sweet, right? You have Tyrese Maxey, who has tons of upside. You have Jared McCain, who, like you said, was on pace to be Rookie of the Year. Great shooter. So, why not just add a tenacious athlete in there with VJ Edgecombe? So, overall, I give him a B.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that's kind of where you want to try to separate some of the other stuff that we know is probably going to happen with the actual roster itself. Because the actual roster, like I said, there's a lot of good parts about it. It's just, again, trying to put it all together is the tricky part because it's just very difficult, in my opinion, to believe, that this team is going to be able to get to where they want to go, right? Because, again, last year they put that group together because they were trying to contend for the championship, and it just didn't work out, as we said, largely because they weren't healthy. But, that was kind of always a concern in the first place. But either way, if you're Philly, because you gave Embiid the money and the extension, right, you're kind of wed to the idea of we got to put a contending team around him, or at least a team that has a chance, right? Because they would have a chance if they were fully healthy. And that's, kind of where, you do question what do you think? Like, are you kind of just in the mindset of you just probably, you can't pick this team to come out of the Eastern Conference? Like you're kind of out on Philly by this point.
Yeah, and the harsh reality is, okay, here's how I'll frame it, right? Love the offseason. Love what they've done. Projecting them to be one of the worst teams in the league. And it has really nothing to do with their offseason and stuff like that. It's more so we already know that these guys are going to be missing time. Once again, I can't put my faith in a core that's led by Paul George and Joel Embiid in the big 2025. I can't, because both of those guys are going to miss significant amount of time. And that's not even accounting for the other guys who could potentially miss time. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but injuries happen. So I'm just done with the Philly propaganda. I can't back it. I can't.
But like you said, they have done a good job with the young core because, let's say, hopefully it doesn't happen. But let's say there's a world where they, where Embiid just can't play as much consistently, and you have to end up kind of bailing on it. Like, you have some good young players. Again, without Embiid, who's a big part of their group, they're still probably going to suck, right? But at least you have some, at least some promising players to potentially, build off of. It's just, again, we've already kind of seen the last few years where they're very dependent on Embiid. Like, despite the talent that they have, if he doesn't play, it's very difficult for them to hold on. Because as we said, he's one of the best players in the league and very pivotal to everything that they do on both ends of the floor, especially when you think about it. If you remove him, then they're a puny team because he's really the main reason why you even really look at Philly as a big team, even though they're really not. But, everybody else outside of, I guess, Paul George, there's a lot of small guys on that roster. Again, I mean, assuming Quentin Grimes comes back, that's 4 guards that are amongst the best players in their rotation, and they're all, a bit on the smaller side, aside from, I guess, what is Grimes, 6'4"?
4? I would say 4. Yeah. Last time I remember.
Right. So, I mean, yeah, you don't really have that many guys, with a lot of size. And that would kind of be the thing that I would worry about, again, if Embiid has to miss time, because I think that's part of it, right? Just aside from him being their best player, I mean, look at who they have behind them. I mean, they have bigs, but Drummond, age 32, just not quite the same guy anymore either, right? Not really a guy you want starting at this point. Bona, right? Again, really good athlete, right? But just kind of just limited on the offense.
Yeah, then. Can't replicate what Embiid brings. Heck no.
Right, and again, none of these guys can. It's just just if you were trying to come up with a backup plan, in case Embiid's out, it's just tough because it's you've invested so much money into him that you don't really need to invest in a backup big, and they have other bigs. It's just like I said, just not guys that I necessarily want playing a whole lot. But either way, for any team, if your best player's out for an extended period of time, you're probably cooked anyways. But they feel like one of those teams where, like, as where, and which has been the case for them for a while. If their best player's out for any length of time, they're in a lot of trouble. So if we're looking at their over-under. Now, keep in mind, last year they won, 24 games? Their over-under this year is 41.5. So that is about, a 17-win increase from last year. So the question is, this is, in my opinion, one of the trickiest ones out there. So what are we thinking?
Give me the under. I know last year we picked the over. Goodness gracious, yeah. Last year we picked the over. On the basis of we thought, okay, yeah, sure, they might miss time, but when they were going to play together, we thought that they would look amazing, but yeah, lo and behold, that didn't happen, and that's why we're here. So I'm going to go under and learn from my mistake from last year.
Yeah, this is a tricky one. I think I'll probably go under as well. I mean, the issue is, again, how many games is he going to play? If he plays less than 50 games, then I don't really see how they get to 40 wins, because most of their wins are going to primarily come from him playing. They're not going to get a lot of wins, it seems like, while he's out, unless you get a bounce back season from Paul George. But you also have to consider, I think he's got an off-season procedure that he's, dealing with, right? So yep. I think he's supposed to, so he's supposed to, I don't know if he's expected to miss regular season time, but he's still rehabbing right now from some off-season procedures. And he's also, age-wise, he's 35. So, the likelihood that he'll be significantly better, I don't know how high that is. Now, you could say, well, maybe last year he was hurt so much that isn't who he is, right? That, like, is just a bad year, just where he was just kind of just brutalized by injury, right? It's just the question is, what does a bounce-back year for him at age 35 look like, right? Is it the all-star level that we saw, his last year with the Clippers? Or, is it, like, better than last year, but still probably not the same player? Probably somewhere in the middle, So, like, that's probably what you're going to get. And I think you need closer to the Clippers last year version of Paul George for the Sixers to have, a really good shot. And then, obviously, Maxey, you assume will continue to get better, because he's the one that, like you said, is young and has upside. But, if all their guys are, let's say Paul George and Embiid miss time, if the other guys are healthy, they should still be better than last year. But again, if Embiid misses, like, still plays only like 50 games, then, like, yeah, they'll be better, but it'll be like from 24 wins to like 35, 38 wins or something like that. It's just, but they are in the East. So this is one of those that could bite us in the back, if they're healthy. But yeah, but either way, it's just hard for me to bank on that.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah. So let us know your thoughts in the comments about Philadelphia. I guess, just as a potential wrap up, I guess, for the Philly situation, let's say they have another bad season. What would you do?
Yeah, that's a good question, because one would think, well, now it's time to kind of question, okay, well, can we even really win a championship with Joel Embiid? And I think that's everyone's end goal in Philadelphia, is to win the championship. So maybe you kind of start to question, if this is going to work out in the long run, right? Maybe you trade him, maybe you potentially, start fielding offers. I don't know. But I think you would have to kind of take a look at something and realize, okay, we've got a great young core, but realistically, is Joel Embiid holding us back from true contention? That's what I would. You maybe start to begin to ask those questions legitimately.
So he's got $55 million this year, 57 after that, then 62, then 67 player option in 28, 29. Then Paul George is 51, 54, and then in 27, 28 a player option for 56.5 million. So I don't know. I mean, maybe Paul George might be the one that you look at, but that one may just be very tricky to move, because I don't think they're going to trade Joel Embiid, because I think he's the franchise guy. I think they want to build around him. So I don't think they do that, and I don't even know if they really can. But they may just kind of be stuck with this roster if it just doesn't work out. I mean, they have some other movable parts, but you're already kind of in a tough spot, like, because you have two guys that make over $50 million, and they're only going to make more. as they both get older. So I don't really know what they do, but like I said, I'm hopeful that they'll have a healthier bounce back season. I just, even if they do, I don't know how much better they're going to be because I just don't know how healthy they can actually be. But again, as we've said many times, if they are healthy, I do think this is a really good team, and in the Eastern Conference, it could be enough. It's just I don't think they can get, even if they get through the regular season, I don't think they can get through that and the postseason because they haven't shown it.
Yeah, you're right.
So now we're moving on to another team, the New Orleans Pelicans, right? A little bit different of a situation here, right? Like this is a team that also has an issue where, their best player unfortunately has not been able to play, consistently, right? Zion Williamson last year, honestly, had some stretches last year where he looked really good. But again, only 30 games played, right? In those 30 games, 25 points, 5 assists, right? Career high in assists. He also actually gave you a career high in rebounds. He averaged over 7 rebounds a game. Still didn't really take a lot of threes, but that's just not really part of his game. But again, only 30 games played. But they had a very busy offseason where they made a lot of moves where it's a type where you had to go back and look and actually like read what they were doing just because it's a pretty significant amount of stuff going on here. So they were active in the draft, they were active in the trade market, and they were active in free agency, right? In the draft, they took a couple of guys. They took Jeremiah Fears, right, the point guard, and then they also took Derek Queen, the big man out of Maryland, right? So off the bat, I remember when we first talked about their draft, we were kind of the mindset of, okay, we like the players. They're not perfect, but we like the players and think that they'll be good. But the problem is we don't really like them on this team because if you look at their roster as a whole, I mean, at the big spot, okay, they don't have like a ton of great options, big man spot, but you have Yves Missi, right? You have Derek Queen, right? And then you have Makovich, and then they also signed Kevon Looney. So, Missi was a guy where we were not quite as high, like not that we didn't like him, but we didn't expect him to be as ready to contribute as quickly as he was, right? Because he was basically like a starting level big right out of the gates. And I think we were kind of thinking like he's kind of raw. It'll probably take him some time to figure that spot out. But he was honestly one of the more impressive rookies last year. And again, like, okay, New Orleans is in this weird spot where it's like, okay, a lot of these other teams that are bad are in the phase of, well, we don't really want to draft for fit. We need to draft based off of talent because we're just not very good. But New Orleans has a lot of really talented players. So I'm curious to see how that's going to look. We saw Derek Queen in the summer league. He only played in a few games because then he got hurt. And now he's going to be out for a decent amount of time, right? Like I think he's going to miss at least a couple of months, right? So he may not even be ready to begin the season, which is unfortunate.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll see what happens there. But remember, for Derek Queen, they actually traded up in order to get him. They traded away their unprotected first-round pick for this season. So if the Pelicans are bad, it goes to the Hawks, right, who are trying to potentially contend to come out of the Eastern Conference. So that's a pretty risky move because, again, you're basically saying we need to make the playoffs, right? Like that's not a move that you make if you're going to just consider like, all right, we're going to rebuild. Like you're kind of doing something to try to make the playoffs. So we'll see what they do, but I don't necessarily know if that's going to pan out, especially because he's already hurt. Then they also, in the trade market, they went after Jordan Poole. So they traded CJ McCollum, they traded Kelly Olynyk for Jordan Poole and Sadiq Bey. Now Poole, fortunately enough, as you know, right, he was on the Wizards last year.
Mm-hmm.
He had a much better season last year in Washington than the year before, right? I think because you mentioned like they gave him the ball more, the ball was in his hands more, so it was more like playing his style of basketball, right? But luckily, it was a better style of basketball individually, stats wise, for him. But when you look at this Pelicans roster, you drafted Jeremiah Fears. Why are you trading for Jordan Poole? That's kind of the part that is a little bit confusing to me. You also have DeJounte Murray, who is on this roster. He actually does exist. They traded for him. They gave up Dyson Daniels to get him, so we'll see if that pans out. But he's not ready to play just yet because he's coming back from a torn Achilles. So, assuming he eventually comes back, you're going to have DeJounte Murray, you're going to have Fears and Jordan Poole, right, all on the same roster together. Jordan Hawkins is still on the roster. Jose Alvarado's still on the roster. I mean, that's a lot of guards. And, their original group that they had before, right? They had like Herb Jones playing the two, right? With Trey Murphy and Zion, as the wings, as the forward. So Herb Jones, they gave a nice extension, right? So he's, in the last couple of years of his deal, so he's got like a 3-year, 60 $7 or so million deal. Like, that'll be an extension that starts in 27, 28. That's fine, right? He's a good 3-and-D player. Didn't have a great season last year, but he was also hurt. He is 27, so how much more upside is there? I don't know. But I do like him as a player. Then Trey Murphy, right? He's going to be in year 1 of his extension. He had a massive extension. He's going to be making $25 million this year. And then at the end of his contract in 28, 29, he's going to be making $31 million. So this is not necessarily what I would call a cheap roster. But there's also a lot of players where I'm not sure if all these guys can play together because it's a lot of guys who need the ball in their hands. And that was kind of the issue it seemed like they were running into when they had Zion and Ingram together. And we didn't get to see last year, right, what DeJounte Murray and McCollum and Ingram and Zion, were going to look like because they got hurt, right? I think Murray got hurt initially on opening night with his hand. And so then he missed some time. Then he comes back. Then not long after he comes back, he tears his Achilles. But by the time he comes back, Ingram is gone. And then Zion's gone. So we saw a very limited sample size of what all those guys look like together. But I just don't really like the combination of a lot of these players, in my opinion. Again, as I've said, I like a lot of the players that they picked up, but not on this team and not together. Even a guy like a Looney. I mean, that contract, when we first heard about it, sounded kind of bad, but then it's like second year's a team option or non-guaranteed. So it's like, whatever, right? He's a veteran, even though he's only 29. And again, they have other bigs on the roster, but he's like a veteran locker room guy. Seems like everybody likes him. He'll be with Poole again, so we'll see if that makes a difference. But I don't know. This is a weird, weird, weird team. So it's like, a lot of the moves individually I'm okay with, but like I said, just when you put them all together in a blender, it's just too much of a cluster. So, I mean, I feel like I kind of have to give them a D for this one because, like I said, I like the players and I think a lot of these guys could be good, but what's the goal here? What's the vision? I can't really tell because, you said it best when we did some of our other rebuilds recently, right? Where you're kind of grading someone on a curve based off of what the expectation for this team is. And I don't know what it is. I'm assuming they want to win games. But if that's the case, what's with all this weird mix of guys? Because some of those guys, how are they going to get minutes? I guess some of them will get minutes now because guys are hurt. Like DeJounte Murray's out. So that opens the door for Jeremiah Fears to come and play. Queen would have probably gotten minutes and opportunities to play, but now he's hurt. So, but when the team's fully healthy, I don't know. Does this look like a playoff team? I mean, in theory, it should be, but I don't know if I can really trust it. And again, you can't trust Zion to play like Embiid. You can't trust him to play, 65 plus games. It just maybe it happens, but so far, how many times has that happened so far in his career? I mean, I think he's done that once. I mean, I guess his second year, the seasons were shorter. So I think in 2020, 2021, he played 61 games, and that was like a 72-game season.
Mm-hmm.
So he's had 2 seasons where he didn't miss extended time. But guess what? Right at the end of those seasons, he got hurt. So then he still wasn't able to finish those seasons. So I don't know. This, like I said, this is one of the strangest teams in the league. I mean, people are talking about the idea of maybe they take the team out of New Orleans. I don't know. If I was a Pelicans fan, I don't think I'd be super excited about this roster just because what are they going to do with it? I mean, if you move Zion and some of these other guys and kind of just go full on, okay. But they're kind of trying to have it both ways. It's almost like when we talked about the 2 timelines thing. But what's the good timeline? We've only seen, I think 2 Pelicans teams make the playoffs, but as lower seeds and no Zion. So there really isn't like a strong level of positive moments here. So I don't know. This is one of those tricky ones to me, but I don't like it.
Yeah, I'm giving him an F. I'm just as low as you are, if not lower, right? None of these moves make sense whatsoever, from any standpoint, right? Collectively and even individually, I really just don't understand what the thought process was. I think their priorities are all over the place. They're gambling with their future, which is something I definitely don't like, right? Like, sure, it's always great to bet on yourself as a team, but not in a scenario like this where you're about to lose your first round pick. I mean, that's pretty much a lock guarantee for that, right? And we're in a situation where it kind of meets talent and fit, and I think right here they prioritized a lot of talent but not fit. They did not think about can these guys work together, because this is a lot of players that are going to need the ball to create, right? You already talked about it, especially the guards, right? I don't know how Jordan Poole, Jeremiah Fears, and DeJounte Murray, whenever he comes back, are supposed to coexist together. I've seen it firsthand with Zion, who is your hub, right? So I've seen it firsthand in Washington with Jordan Poole. Yeah, like you said, statistically he had a bounce back year, but there are going to be stretches and there are going to be growing pains of this guy is wildly inefficient. And I think it's interesting that they got rid of CJ McCollum for Jordan Poole, who, like I just said, is going to be wildly inefficient at times. And I think whereas CJ McCollum, sure, his age wasn't, very, very helpful towards, him recently, but I think he was still a little bit more consistent and definitely more efficient and fit. I think the timeline a little bit more, in New Orleans than Jordan Poole, right? And that's where I'm like, the talent is just sure, yeah, like these are great players, like you talked about individually, but collectively they're not going to work together. I think everybody likes Derek Queen, especially going into the draft. Everybody knew that, there were some questions about conditioning, stuff like that. But if you watch ball, that, the guy's a hooper, point blank, period. I don't think he was worth trading up, especially that pick, considering, that it's pretty much a lock to not return to you. So that makes no sense from that regard. Not a big fan of what I saw from Jeremiah Fears. Not going to write him off. Based off of, a few summer league games, but that's another thing. Wildly inefficient. Turns the ball over, has great handles, but I'm confused how a guy is supposed to, be touted as a playmaker, but turns the ball over at a wild rate and also can't shoot outside and can barely finish as well. So that's where I just don't understand. And I feel like the big question that should have been answered this offseason was what they were going to do with Zion Williamson. And nothing really happened. I mean, I guess they gave him the backing, right, of, him being the franchise guy, but we've heard that multiple times through, 2 different regimes now? So I'm losing faith in it, right? And it's a similar situation to Philly where, yeah, you want to feel great about this team because they do have a guy like Zion Williamson, and like Philly, has Joel Embiid, but at the end of the day, I just feel like they're a hodgepodge of mess, and like you said, it's too chaotic. And I think when you have this much chaos, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, what else can you do? I have to give them an F because I don't understand this, right? This is like me asking somebody to write me a paragraph in English and they give it to me in Spanish. I don't understand it. I'm sorry, I don't. Respectfully, F. No comprende.
Oh my gosh. But yes, and it's funny, like, I kind of wish that I mentioned more of individual skill sets of those young guys that they draft. Like you said, with Fears, again, like he's got a good handle. He's got, some good shiftiness and speed to his game. But like you said, the only issues is, and Summer League, you always have to take it with a grain of salt. But there wasn't anything that I saw when I watched him in Summer League that made me feel better about his weakness. And that's kind of the concern that I have there, where it's like, okay, watching him, his jump shot still isn't really going in consistently. He got to the free throw line at times, but like you said, finishing just felt like a little bit more up and down. But I think the hope is that once he gets to the actual team, he'll be playing with better guys. And so maybe the defenses won't be as focused on him quite as much. And then maybe he can slip through the cracks and take advantage of some of these other opportunities. But my other issue is that is he going to have the ball as much as he had it in summer league? And I would say probably not, especially if the team is at full strength. I mean, maybe he runs the second units, but just I don't know. I think that's kind of a tough one where I don't think this is a great situation for him to develop, right? Like, I think ideally if he was on a team that was more so rebuilding and kind of needed to take a franchise point guard, okay. You know, can he be a franchise point guard? We'll have to see. But I don't know if he'll get as many opportunities. Maybe somebody could be optimistic and make the case that, okay, maybe he'll have a little bit more room to fail because the team's not as reliant on him being really good. But, I would think you would like for him to have more opportunities to actually run the offense, which I don't think he will as much on this team because there's just other guys that will be in the pecking order ahead of him, especially like I said, once they're fully healthy, whenever DeJounte back. But either way, I don't know. And then like you said for Queen, again, he's got some really good skills. He's especially for a big, right? Like decent touch. He can play downhill. He can pass. We saw a lot of that, but there's still other areas of his game that he has to iron out, right? He still, defensively kind of has to continue to improve, right? And then, it seems like physically, right, he needs to be a little bit better conditioned. And unfortunately, because of the injury, he may have to spend a little bit more time rehabbing than just kind of, working on his body and whatnot. I don't remember specifically what the injury was, so I don't know if it's like one just can't run. But, either way, both of those guys are young. So like, I'm hopeful that those guys will be able to continue to get better. It's just a matter of, again, can they do that in this environment with this team as currently constructed? I just don't think that's going to be the case, But again, some of the individual players like Trey Murphy III had a great year last year, right? It went under the radar because the Pelicans stunk, but he was a guy that definitely took advantage of a lot of the opportunities that he was given. I mean, not only did he average 20, he averaged 20 a game with 5 rebounds, 3.5 assists. And, it wasn't like he was just doing what he was doing before, where it's mostly, him spotting up and, playing off the ball. He had a lot more on-ball chops last year, right? That's why he was able to get, those points and those assists up, right? I mean, so that was a lot of really good progression from him. And they need that considering the money he's making, right? Because now he's kind of in that, he's in that $30 million a year range. So Jordan Hawkins, kind of a wild situation for him, right? Because when he was drafted, right, he initially wasn't playing a whole lot. Then guys were hurt, so then he did play. But now it feels like he's even lower on the totem. So based off of what you've seen from him the first couple of years, what do you think of him? Because I know he was drafted 14th overall, so right at the end of the lottery. Yeah. But last year, it felt like it was a little bit of a step back. I mean, I guess there was an uptick in the minutes, but again, that team was a mess. So how much of that is necessarily on him? And I'm not even saying he's bad because, again, he didn't get to play with the full group for the most part. And, the opportunities were up and down, right? Because like when they were fully healthy, he wasn't really playing. When they were banged up, that's where he got those opportunities, right? But he's a guy where I would think he would be better playing off of other players.
Yeah. The thing about it, because coming out of that draft, that was my guy, right? I mean, we talked about it. I thought, he was going to be one of the better shooters in the league, and I think, arguably was, right? Especially in terms of contested shots, right? Like he's one of those guys where he doesn't really feel the contest, but yeah, I'm not really sure where he fits into this whole concoction that New Orleans has somehow created. And I think that's the problem, right? Because you have so much talent. Some of these guys aren't going to play, and some of them probably won't return. And I think Jordan Hawkins is probably a better fit for a guy like Zion than maybe a guy like Fears or Jordan Poole, right? Because he doesn't really need the ball to be successful. He kind of just is your typical role player who hits tough shots. And I think every team needs that. So I am curious where they're going to find minutes for him in a
Right.
very saturated roster like that.
Yeah, and that's kind of and like you said, you made a good point when you mentioned like, that's a guy that seems more like a Zion player. And that's really where the problem that I have with this roster is like you said, you can't really tell whether or not they're trying to optimize a roster around Zion and win games and try to compete, or are they kind of preparing for a rebuild? That's the part where I'm not sure about. I guess the question is, you seem like you're kind of at the point where you think ideally they need to move on from Zion and trade him. Maybe the stock might be low, so you're not going to get a whole lot back. But you're thinking that they should move on from.
Yeah, I've been saying that I think since last year. Every year it's something in terms of his health, whether it be weight or injuries, right? So why even continue to invest in something that is not going to give you a good return? And it goes back to what I was talking about with Philly, right? Like, is this guy holding us back from contention? And what is the return going to look like? Are you willing to sit through another rebuild? What kind of return are you looking for in terms of stars? Are you looking for stars? Are you looking for picks? What are you looking for? And I think those are the questions that should have been asked and potentially answered in one offseason, maybe two.
Yeah.
I've been screaming this from the top of my lungs since we first started seeing serious injury and maturity issues.
Yeah. So then I guess the question is, I guess we'll look at it from two angles, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we'll start with them keeping Zion. So let's say they keep Zion,
Okay.
right? Which guys are you kind of looking at like, all right, these are the guys that I would want to probably keep around? Because I think like we already kind of saw Murphy and Jones; those guys already fit pretty
Yeah,
well.
they're locked in long term.
Yeah, so those two guys, I think you already start off with locking them in. But who else?
Yeah, and that's the problem. I mean, there's a lot of young guys on this team that we haven't even seen really play, right? I don't think Jordan Poole is a long-term option, so we can scratch him off. Fears, maybe, but he's a rookie. Derek Queen, that's the same thing. Maybe, but he's a rookie. So I think Yves Missy, solid rookie campaign. What does he look like sophomore year? And that's the thing. Like, I really don't know. And, they were willing to let guys like Brandon Boston kind of just go. So I don't know what their plan is in terms of young guys, but I would probably go with Herb Jones and Trey Murphy. Those are the only two guys that I can, and maybe probably Jordan Hawkins as well, because they let go of Dyson Daniels lickety split. So I don't know.
Right, yeah. And like that would be a guy where you kind of wonder like if he got the opportunities, how would he look? Because he's another guy, that kind of sometimes, that can kind of play with and without the ball, but he's just not a strong outside shooter,
Sure.
right? Like he can cut. But then you look at his defense, and there was a stretch where like New Orleans defense was actually really good, despite not having that many guys that are looked at as great defenders. But so then let's say you move on from Zion, you're probably not getting the star back. You're probably going to get, I don't know, like maybe some random players back and then maybe like a pick or something like that. So then you're kind of thinking, all right, if that's the case, then you don't really have any questions about keeping any of the young players because those are your young players, right? So what would you do with some of the other guys on the roster then?
Yeah, that's the thing. I really don't know. And this is why I'm not a GM. But at the end of the day,
Mm-hmm.
would you move? I don't know. I don't know how I would feel about moving forward with a guy like DeJounte Murray, right? Does he work with Zion? Does he work with these other guys? Like I said, I think Jordan Poole is one of those guys where long term he's not the answer. He's here for whatever reason they brought him here for. Obviously a CJ McCollum replacement. Not too crazy of an upgrade in my opinion, but
He'll probably start, a while, especially while Murray's out.
yeah, and what the heck is that going to look like? I don't know if that's going to net you a whole lot of wins. It'll net you some highlights, but I don't know if that's going to translate to the win column, which is what they need, which is why I don't understand why they're in this position in the first place. If you're a lock, if you want to be a lock to be a playoff team in the Western Conference, this is in the East. In the Western Conference, this roster's not going to cut it. Talent-wise, sure, they could do it, but fit-wise and scheme-wise, I don't see it happening. No shot.
Yeah. So I guess, and we didn't do it with Philly, so I guess we can do it with Philly as well. But, we'll start with New Orleans since we're talking about them right now. What the heck is the starting five for New Orleans on opening night because we're assuming Murray's out
Yeah.
because he's done have the Achilles.
Uh-huh.
So, I mean, I guess maybe it'll be easier. What's your ideal starting line for this team? All right, let's just say if everybody's healthy, what's your ideal starting five?
DeJounte Murray. Yeah, this is where it gets tricky. I guess do you put Trey Murphy
Okay.
and then Herb, Zion,
All right.
and Queen? I mean that's what I would go with.
Yeah, I guess that because that starting five initially because it's like all right, you got Murray as ball guard. Just the question is 3-point shot, is it there?
Mm-hmm.
And then Jones and Murphy are like your 3-and-D guys,
Yeah.
right? Jones is more 3-and-D. Murphy's more like 3 offensive, more minded than defense.
Yeah.
Zion's your main scorer. Then you got Messi, and then or Queen, and it's like if you want more 3-point shooting, then I guess you kind of have to go with Queen. If you want more rebounding and defense, right, and a guy that doesn't need the ball as much, then probably Messi. And like you said, that's where it gets really tricky because you have to kind of figure out a balance, with all these guys in your lineup. And that's where I'm just not really sure how the heck that's going to work. Which is, again, I don't always like just going into like, all right, they need to trade this guy and do all this right now. Because, we would like to talk about the roster as is, but you do have to weigh in on, what they could do. Because there is a world where, the team stinks and they realize it. And then what do? And especially, again, if they didn't trade their pick, then there wouldn't be too many issues. But since that pick is gone, like I said, I feel like they're going to have to be good. But, I guess we might as well look at the over-under and kind of question, is this team going to be good? Because if you look at Vegas, they are very low on this team. Their over-under is at 29.5. So what are we doing here?
I'm taking the over, but it ain't by much. I would have them winning around 30 games. I don't see them winning over 32. So within 32 to 30 games, I think is the ballpark that I have them at. Like I said, I think the talent can net them wins. However, it's not going to translate to playoff contention and getting a locked in spot in the playoffs. It's not going to happen. It just won't.
Yeah, I'll go over too. I think kind of like what we mentioned with Philly, there were a lot of guys last year that missed a lot of time, right? Because I mean, like you said, even beyond just Zion, if you put the roster out, in terms of games played, you only had 2 guys that played more than 60 games. Everyone else was at 56 games or less, right? Like Yves Messi played the most at 73. Then Jeremiah Robinson Earl played 66. After that, McCollum played 56. Murphy played 53. DeJounte Murray played 31. Zion played 30. And then you had some of the guys who were traded to the team later. Herb Jones only played 20. Ingram only played 18 before they traded him. So that's where I think, like, hopefully, let's say Zion is like the only guy that missed a decent amount of time. That should already make you at least a few wins back. So I would go over as well. But like you said, it's hard to go by much because the Western Conference is still going to be really good. And, there's always going to be at least a couple teams that will underperform and a couple teams that will overperform. I don't think this is either of those teams. Like, I don't think this is the team that surprises everybody and ends up being, like a 48-win team or something like that. And, the over-under is so low. I think right now people are expecting them to just not be very good.
Yep.
So, I don't see that team being either or. They'll probably, like you said, be in that mix where it's like they are better than last year, but probably still not quite good enough to really make the playoff. Just because, again, you need your best players to be relatively healthy, and I can't trust that Zion's going to be healthy. And I don't like the composition of this roster.
Yeah.
Like you said, they have a lot of talent, but it's not great fits together. And, some of those guys, we haven't seen. Like, I've not seen Fears and Queen play NBA games at all. And so it's like, and they didn't really look that amazing in Summer League. Again, it's just Summer League, so they could look better. And, but we won't even see Queen, at least for a little bit, because he's hurt. So,
yeah.
Which guy are you higher on?
Between what? Queen or
Between
Fears?
Yeah. Which guy
Oh,
are you higher on?
no question, Queen. Offensively, I love what I've seen from him. I love what I saw from him in college. I love what I saw from both of them in college. Really, I am being harsh on Fears because of the summer league, and I know I shouldn't be, but I just have to because that's all I've seen in terms of quote unquote NBA basketball. But Derek Queen, I loved everything I saw from him. Right, he showcased a lot of the passing, outside shot, great touch on the inside. So I'm gonna go with Queen on that one. What about you?
Yeah, I'd probably say the same thing because just the issue is that, like, worst case scenario, he could be, like a 20 something minute a game, big because, like you said, offensively, he still has a lot to work with, like in a good way. With Fears, I need to see the jumper because I just think it's very difficult to be, especially because he's kind of small. I just think it's very difficult to be a relatively small guard without like a decent jump shot. Like, I mean, you don't have to be Steph or Dame or Kyrie, but I think you need to be. You can't be a guy that teams are just okay with not really defending from the perimeter, and that's kind of where I would be a little bit worried about with him. But again, it's not over. He's not cooked, right? He hasn't
Right.
even played an NBA game just yet, right? And he's still young, so he can certainly develop and continue to be fine. But we'll just have to wait and see with him. But I think he'll be. I think he'll be solid. Like like I don't know if I can expect him to ever be like in the upper tier of point guards, right? But like I think I think he'll be like decent. I just don't know. I don't know if I'm as high on him maybe as some others. But like you said, we like both guys. I just like I said, if I could have put them on some other teams, like let's say Fears was in like Washington, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a worse team,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, than New Orleans, but
Mm-hmm.
like he would have more on ball opportunities.
Yeah.
So we'd actually kind of get to see does he really have what it takes to potentially be, an on-ball franchise point guard. Now again, you don't write a guy off after year one, but he would get plenty of minutes and, opportunities to do that. We just New Orleans is just a lot trickier and there's a lot of other stuff that has to be balanced as well. I just think it'd be a better development spot for him in Washington than New Orleans.
I agree.
But we'll see. Cuz with Washington, it's really mainly been the last few years, right, where like people have been higher on their decision making, right, and everything else, right? Like for a while, like it wasn't really at like that.
Right,
But
for sure.
it does feel like they're in a better place now than they were before.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, and then for Queen, let's say if he was in like Charlotte, right? Like they had no centers, prior to what they were doing. Like that would have been an interesting environment to see him in.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, I would have definitely liked to seen these guys go elsewhere because this was worst case scenario, I think, for both of them.
Yeah. Now again, if he's in Charlotte, you got no defense, right?
Sure.
With most of the other guys, but like I said, I just think the opportunities would be there. I think ideally you want to go to a spot where you have plenty of opportunities to maximize both your development and your ability to put up, whatever numbers. Whereas, like, say like in New Orleans, if he doesn't play well, then they'll be like, all right, we'll put in Yves Missi. We'll put in one of these other guys, right? Like, whereas, like, if he doesn't play well for one of those other teams, he'll still play. Like, same thing with Fears. If he was in Washington and wasn't playing well, he's not going to get benched for someone else. Like that's just probably not going to happen. But I think obviously we'll talk about Washington later. But would you have rather taken Fears over Trey Johnson?
No, sorry, respectfully, I wouldn't. We'll get there when we get there, but I'm very high. I'm higher on Trey Johnson than I was Jeremiah Fears going into the draft. Even said that.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that as well. So. Again, let us know your thoughts in the comments about New Orleans and their roster and what you think about what they did. I guess since we didn't do it before, right? Starting lineup for Philly, say if they're fully healthy, Paul George, Embiid, Maxey mixed with two other guys. Like which other two guys are you putting in?
Yeah, that's the thing. I feel like maybe. Depending on the night, really, because the wings is where I think Philly is kind of questionable because you really could just label Edgecombe and McCain as two guards and call it a day and just move them down to the three. Yeah, I probably put in Edgecombe or McCain. I think interchangeable.
You just start all three and then have Paul George as your 4 and Embiid as your
Probably,
5?
probably. I mean, that's the
Okay.
only thing that I think would work. I mean, I know it probably wouldn't help because you don't have a true power forward, but I don't know.
Yeah, because unless you're starting Watford, I mean,
I don't really want to do that.
yeah, unless you're starting Watford, you kind of almost have no choice, like you said. But unless you're starting Oubre, I
That's
guess.
another good option.
Yeah, because he was starting at different points.
Mm-hmm.
So they might do that. They might have Oubre and George and Embiid, and then one of the non-maxi guards will
Probably
probably
be
come off.
McCain.
Yeah.
Well, McCain will probably start, and then Edgecombe probably comes off the bench because he's a rookie.
Or
Grimes, whenever he comes back.
Yeah, technically he's still not re-signed. So, all right, we'll see. But now we're moving on, to a couple news rumors. Not like a ton, but just a couple of things, right? So John Wall, he did retire, right? He announced his retirement on social media right after 11 seasons. Played for the Wizards, played for the Clippers, played for the Rockets, right? Again, was the number 1 pick, right, back in 2010. Actually, now Paul George is the only player from that draft who's left. But again, he made Washington a fun team again, right? Because I mean, for a while they were, kind of struggling right at different points, and they brought him in, and he was a really fun player to watch. He was actually one of the first guys that I saw in person.
Same.
So so that was kind of cool to see. Again, Washington at its best, right at his peak, right? It's kind of tough to talk about because he got hurt basically like right around his peak, right? Because what was it? The 2017-18 stretch was where he kind of had his best basketball. Then I think, what was it? It was around like that 18, 19, 20 stretch, right? Where he had the heel issue and then the Achilles issue. And then after that, he just wasn't really able to kind of get back to, the best version of himself, right? Because, he wasn't really ever considered the best point guard at that time, but he was always kind of in that discussion of like, is he like a top 5 point guard or whatever? And, the Wizards had some really good seasons where he was there. It sounds like he's going to join the Amazon Prime NBA broadcast, so that's really cool. I mean, I haven't heard much of him, but the couple of times I've heard him talk about basketball, I think he's got some really good skills there.
Yeah,
so
IQ.
So I'd like to see that. What do you think? I mean, you're the Wizards guy, so
yeah.
I would think this is a big deal, especially to you.
Yeah, this is a huge deal to me. The city also as well, right? Like people don't understand the impact that he had on the city. As a whole, right? Did a lot for the community. You always have to shout that out. But he brought people to Capital One. If you go to Capital One now, it's filled with visitors. But when John Wall was on the team, Capital One was filled with Wizards fans overall, just because obviously we were good back then. And he was there from pretty much rock bottom to the peak of the Wizards, which was the Eastern Conference semifinals against Boston, right? And he delivered some thriller moments, crazy highlights. Yeah. One of the more underrated players, I think, of our generation, and it's really unfortunately the end of an era, right? But yeah, you always have to shout the guy out. Pretty much gave you an automatic 20 and 10 every night, and I think that's pretty underrated, right? His passing was great. IQ was great. We all know about, the John Wall, Marcin Gortat pick and roll, pretty much unstoppable at certain points in games.
Great athlete.
Yeah, great athlete, and also very underrated defender. Yeah, he got cooked sometimes. There's lots of, film on that, but, search up the film on him putting clamps on your favorite point guard. It happened. Sorry, like he chased down your favorite point guard. He was a stopper and arguably, one of the better two-way point guards of all time. So, I'm always show love to John Wall. I hate how it ended, in Washington. Was never a fan of that. You were there for that, and you know how livid I was. That was before we were doing the podcast. Not a fan of the post John Wall era at all, but yeah, means a lot because that's one of the players that got me into hoops, and just growing up around and watching his career blossom. It was amazing. Like, from being a kid, pretty much, all the way up until like college and high school. What a wild time. Washington was really, I'm not going to say like a lock, for the playoffs every year that, John Wall and Bradley Beal were healthy, but anytime they had a solid team, right, you always thought they had a fighting chance to at least get to the conference finals. Nobody really knew if they could potentially get past Braun in Cleveland or whatever. But yeah, the hype was real, I think. And you know what clip I'm referencing, but yeah, what a time. That's what all I'll say is what a time to be alive. Shout out John Wall, bro.
Oh yeah, for sure. He again, as I said, he made the Wizards fun to watch. Like even during because they had like some years in between where they didn't make the playoffs.
Sure.
But like when they were on, you would watch them play. Especially because Wall would do something. Of course, everybody talks about like the wraparound left-handed dunks.
Oh yeah,
a right guy. And it's kind of funny, right? Because the weakness was the 3-point shot, but he was kind of in that weird stretch where it was like right before you kind of had to be like a really, really strong 3-point shooter as a point guard, right? So he was kind of able to operate inside the 3-point line, right? Like mid-range area, of course, driving to the basket, right? So he was kind of able and to figure a lot of that out. But like you said, and like I said, right as he was getting ready to hit his peak, then he gets hurt, right? So, he probably would have had a longer stretch of being really good.
Yeah.
Would he figure out the 3-point shot? Who knows, right? But, either way, the athleticism itself, along with the frame and everything else was enough to make him one of the better point guards in the league. I'd imagine he's going to have his jersey retired by the Wizards.
Right? I would hope so. I would hope so.
Yeah. Yeah, probably not by the Clippers or the Rockets, but 100% I would be shocked if it wasn't retired by the Wizards. Because like you said, even though it ended not great, it's still he had a really good career with them, some really good years. So I would think he would get his jersey retired. Hall of Fame, you would think he gets in?
That's tough.
That's one of the because that's one of the trickier ones because again, if his career fully played out in relatively injury free, he probably would get in. He may not be first ballot, but I think he would get in. I don't know if he gets in necessarily. Again, not everybody. Again, NBA Hall. Well, it's not NBA. It's Basketball Hall of Fame, right? It's different from some of the other ones, right? Because some of the other ones, it's like just the league itself, so it's trickier to get into, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
But again, like if you look at his career stats, again, his peak was very good, right? Like his peak would be like a guy who, for the Basketball Hall of Fame, should get in, right? I mean, 5-time All-Star. He was on All-NBA one time, third team, I think, he was like All-Defense, I think, one time. So he had some good accolades in there. But it's just I don't know if they're going to feel like that he's played enough. I mean, what do you think? I mean, I guess, quote-unquote bias or whatever, but like just as a whole, like do you think he should get into the Hall of Fame or do you think he will?
Yeah, it's funny. Like a lot of my friends have been asking me, questions about, John Wall, for obvious reasons. But yeah, and one of the questions was the retirement thing, jersey retirement, and I think his jersey number should absolutely be retired and hung from the rafters. No question about that. And also, the Hall of Fame one I think is a little bit trickier, but I think you have to acknowledge his entire career, not just in the NBA, because in college he was pretty elite. There's a reason why he went number one, right? Kentucky, and then high school. Obviously, we all know about the mixtapes as well. People say arguably he has the best high school basketball mixtape of all time. But I think his peak in 2016, 2017, where he was averaging about like 24 and 10, and the progression up to that point, and then obviously kind of sustaining that up until the injury. I think you have to give it to him. You have to. I think, the all-star appearances, what he was able to do, the impact. He's arguably, like I said, one of the more underrated and impactful players of our generation for sure. And I'll stand and die on that hill.
Yeah, he's definitely one of those guys where I think, like...
You had to be there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's one of those guys where, like you said, he was kind of one of the... again, he wasn't, like, number one, but he was, like, on the list of, like, players that, like, we remember from... definitely like towards on the higher end of that list, just because again at that time he was one of the better point guards in the league. So again, hats off to him. So I'm excited to see him on the Amazon Prime broadcast.
Yeah, it should be fun.
He'll actually be there with Blake Griffin, right, former number one overall pick himself in the year prior, right, who's also now obviously retired.
Yes, sir.
And that's another guy that was kind of like in that era of the NBA, right, that kind of helped define it. Again, they're not the number one or two guys, right? But they're on that list.
Yeah, you have to respect them, because I remember there was legit conversations of like
Yeah.
Who's better between like, because I guess there was a time when like it pre Curry, like John Wall, people thought he was a little bit better than Curry. There were also times when people compared Wall and Kyrie. Who else? Wall, Kemba Walker,
Yeah, Chris
Wall,
Paul.
yeah, Chris Paul, Isaiah Thomas too. Like that was the time period where you did have prime IT kind of just giving BTA at any point in any game. So it's crazy.
And Blake Griffin was on that list too. So
True that. True that.
so now, I guess we'll kind of move on to, the last stretch of our podcast, right? And we'll start off with what we normally do, where we talk about our last IG post that we had, and we asked the question of, will the Hawks make the finals, right? And 100%, 100% actually said no.
Okay.
So
Fair. I mean,
yeah, and
I think it could be possible. There's always a
right.
chance. It's not a high chance.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair one, just because of the fact that, again, we talked about it in our Hawks rebuild or Hawks offseason video. I'm thinking of 2K. Jeez. where we said, like, yeah, the Hawks would be really good, but they wouldn't probably be my pick to make the finals.
Exactly.
That's funny. Next up, well, I guess just for the fun of it, because 2K does come out in a week, they did finally release their top 10. So over the last week or so, they were doing their top 100 player ratings. Not going to go over all of that, because that's just, in my opinion, kind of silly to do all of that. But they did have their top 10. So they had Kevin Durant as a 93 overall at 10. They had Wemby as a 94 overall at 9. Actually, they had 494 overall. They had Wemby at 9. They had Tatum at 8. Then they had LeBron at 7, and then they had Steph at 6. Then the top 5 was Ant-Man, 95. Luka also has a 95. And then the top 3, Giannis, 97. And then SGA 2 at a 98. And then Jokic, number 98. So what do you think of this top 10 list? Because I feel like a lot of the rest of it was pretty kooky. But, I think for the most part, I think top 5 is relatively right. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think they got it. To the best of their ability. I mean, there's always going to be bias. I think you kind of have to give some of these guys a little bit of a boost just because of their name, right? We already know how clout works, especially with 2K. But I've seen some very disrespectful ratings outside of the top 10. Like,
yeah, that's what my point. Like, outside of the top 10 is where it got really kooky.
Yeah, like there's some stuff where I can't even fathom how somebody is this low at I don't know. It's weird, but
because there was, and part of it is like, especially when you see guys like that have the exact same overall, where it'll be like, I don't know, and I'm not trying to be like disrespectful or anything, but it's like, say not Darius Garland, Jimmy Butler and Derek White, where I don't think they're the same overall player.
I agree with you.
Yeah, like I don't think they're the same overall. Maybe you might make the case that they're a few overalls apart, but I don't think so. I think they're a little bit further apart from each other. But again, I know with Butler, because of the regular season, like, it's kind of hard to put him in certain overalls because they change over the course of the season, right? Because actually Paul George was like a 90 overall beginning of last year.
I remember.
Here he's like what, like an 81?
Yeah, should have been like a 78, but sure.
Yeah, so his overall is the same as Alex Sarr. So it's like,
oh my god, bro.
And then again, I'm
Can't
not
make it up.
Any of those guys, but Jalen Johnson's an 81. But last year Jalen Johnson was better than Paul George, right? So like, I don't think they're the same overall.
85.
But I also don't think that Paul George and Alex Sarr are like the same overall. My opinion.
No.
So that's kind of the issue there. So that's kind of where some of it, I think, is a little bit tricky. And like you said, the way 2K rates players is just kind of weird. You know what I mean? Because like, just, I don't know. Some of it is just kind of strange. Where it's like, how are these guys the same overall? Anthony Simons and Draymond are the same overall. I don't feel like that's the case.
Yeah, the way certain rate numbers are weighted in the game also can impact stuff. Like, we already know they cater to offense a lot more than defense. So
yeah, or like, I don't know, just kind of looking around, Denny Avdia and Brandon Miller, Like, are they the same overall? I
No.
mean, I don't feel like that's the case. And again, like I said, I'm not going to go over all, but just the game comes out in a week, so just it's worth talking about. Because like I said, the top 10 is relatively fine. I don't really have an issue with that. It's just more so after that is where it gets kind of tricky. And there's like a couple, and like even in the top 10, you can make the case where like maybe you take a guy out and put someone else. But the thing is, what's changed so much is that like there's way more 90 and 80 players than I can remember in the past. Because say you go back to the previous console era of 2K or before that, like there's guys where they have them as like, I remember, I think this was going way back to like 2K 13, 12, 11, so like the 360 PS3 era. There's guys that are like 50 overalls, 60 overalls, 40 overalls. Like the league is deeper and more talented now. But I just feel like the way that they kind of rate these guys, like it's just too close. Like there's too many guys that are, I think, where their overalls are a little too high for my liking. And then then that means that there's some guys that are rated a little too low, some guys that are rated a little bit too high. It'll all even out because eventually, like some guys, based off how they play, like Paolo's an 89 overall, right? If he's not a 90 plus overall by the end, we got an issue, right? Because I think he should be in that range. But of course, they're also factoring in the injuries and whatnot. But We'll see.
Yeah.
Last but not least, let's get to some comments.
Oh boy!
So we had another comment on one of our last shorts. And we'll start off with that one. So it's from The Hawks Are Awesome. The comment is from Richard Curry, HP7QV. And he said, hold your breath for our Hawks Are Awesome short.
Okay.
I don't really have too much of an issue with that, honestly.
Yeah.
Actually, I thought it was a really funny one just because it was like, again, we don't think the Hawks are making the NBA Finals, but we think they're going to be really good.
Yeah. I mean, they had a great offseason. So I expect them to be great, especially in a weak Eastern Conference. It's vacant, and I think their time is now. If they don't take advantage of it, then whoop-de-doo.
Yes. We also had another comment from Ohio Civilian, and this was on the Grizzlies. Will the Grizzlies make the playoffs short? And it was, no, Grizzlies might make the play-in, but they are not as good as all these other teams in the different story if they were in the East anyways. No, they are not making the playoffs. Might be 9th or 10th seed.
I could see that happening. I agree with that.
Yeah, I would say so too.
He hit it on the nose.
Yeah. Then, last but not least, we have another comment that came from That's Be Wild, and this was actually from our Bucks short. We got a lot of comments from that one. The Bucks are stinky short, and the response was, bro, who are you guys? Are y'all even here in Milwaukee? If not, do something else. Giannis by himself is a top 5 seed. 2021 championship team was not better, faster, or younger than this team. Trading Holiday for Dame was the only issue that ever happened. I saw that miles away. Giannis doesn't need superstars. He needs stars that excel at what they do while defending. Top 3 seed at least. This is an upgraded Pacers team, and they won the East last year. Now, the last part, I'm almost assuming that he's saying that this Bucks team is an upgraded version of the Pacers team. I'm thinking that's what he's saying. I don't know. I didn't think he was talking about the Pacers. But what do you think about this comment?
There's so many things. There's so many things that are wrong with this comment. First of all, I want to thank the Lord and my Lord and Savior that I'm not from Milwaukee. That's number one. Number two, let me pull this comment up. Bear with me.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, he said Giannis by himself is a top 5 seed. Debatable, but I'll give it to him. 2021 championship team was not better, faster, or younger than this team. Okay? Trading Holiday for Dame was the only issue that ever happened. If that's the only issue that ever happened, then I don't think we watched the past couple of years of Milwaukee basketball. But sure, I seen that miles away. Okay? Giannis doesn't need superstars. He needs stars that excel at what they do while defending. I agree with that. The problem is they're not on this roster, buddy. Respectfully, like, we're going to keep referencing the meme. Cover up Miles Turner, cover up Giannis. This team is full of scrubs. I'm sorry, you have nothing going for you. Yeah, sure, maybe Milwaukee does find a way to squeeze into the playoffs, but I'm telling you, they're going to suck because they don't have a roster. They don't have a team. It can't just be Giannis backpacking. And we do this every year since we started this podcast with this Milwaukee Bucks fan base. For whatever reason, they don't like us not being high on their team. And I'm sorry, I'm high on Giannis, love him to death. Last year, I picked him to win MVP before the season started. But this season, I cannot say that the Bucks confidently will be good. They're gonna suck again. I'm sorry. There's a lot wrong with that comment, but I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I think the tricky part is when we're getting these comments, I think the main issue that they have is that I think they just didn't like the fact that we said that the Bucks are going to be bad. Like, I think that's kind of the issue here. Because I think if we had kind of just said like, they're not a championship team, but they'll still probably be like a playoff team or whatever, that'd be one thing. But I think that's kind of where the issue is. But like you kind of said, with the 2021 championship team, looking back, if you rank them compared to a lot of the other ones, it's probably not as good as some of the other of this decade, right? Which is fair. But the part that this team, I guess, is younger, I guess technically, but than that championship team. But I don't really think it's necessarily better. That's the problem that I would have, because that team won a championship. So, and also they had Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton from 4 years ago, right? When those guys they weren't all NBA, but they were all-star level players. And, that's the issue. Like the second best player on this team is Miles Turner. And I just don't think that that's going to be good enough to be able to win the championship. Now, if you want to make the case that the East is bad, so just because you think the Bucks are going to be bad, that doesn't mean they're going to be bad. Okay, that's fine. But I guess I'm looking at them from a championship perspective. I don't think it's a championship team. And that's a team to watch. Because, again, right now, right, I think we both assume Giannis will stay in Milwaukee for now. Maybe he'll sign an extension. But am I confident that he's going to stay there and like that they've done enough to make him feel like that this team is going to be really good? I can't say that because, like you said, it has nothing to do with Giannis. It's just the supporting cast, in my opinion, is not good enough to win the championship, right? Even though the East will be worse, there's other teams that just have better supporting cast. But I also understand like the thinking of, I think the other problem is because like Giannis, I think they feel like has been kind of disrespected, where it's like, say like even in 2K, right? They're like, we think he's better than SGA, right? Like, why is he a lower overall, right? Where it's like they feel like SGA's got a better group of guys around him, like a better team, right? Whereas Giannis is, like you said, backpacking to a top 5 seed for the most part, as long as he's relatively healthy. Even like with the Jokic conversation, right? Like, Giannis had like maybe a 2-3 year stretch where he was considered like unanimous best player in the game. Mm-hmm. Now he's not, right? Part of that's been because he's been hurt in the playoffs. The team's gone out early. But, that's where I think a lot of that's coming from. But it's just tough because I'm sorry. I don't think they're going to be that great. They may be better wins-wise than I have them at. But that doesn't mean that they're going to win the championship. A lot would have to go right, including things that I just don't think are going to happen. I mean, because even the backcourt, you got one of the worst starting backcourts in the league. You're going to have to bank on Kevin Porter Jr., Gary Trent Jr., matching up to some of the other, teams in the league. And, like, we're kind of out of the era of star backcourts, but you need one of those guys to be a high-level offensive player pretty much every night in the postseason. And I just don't see that happening, in my opinion. Gary Trent Jr., I think, was good for a couple of games in the postseason, right? I think he averaged like 18, but some of that was because he had like 2 30-something point games, and the other 2 games he wasn't very good, right?
Wow.
So that's kind of the issue there, where my issue is I don't think there's enough talent beyond Giannis, and on the perimeter is where I'd be really, because, again, like, yeah, the Dame Giannis thing ultimately didn't work out, but you still need a guard better than what you have. Because again, even when they won the championship, like Drew Holiday was, Drew Holiday and Middleton backcourt, if I'm not mistaken, right? Like it was those 2 guys, Tucker, and then Giannis and Lopez, right? So like that's a huge downgrade, I think, just overall talent wise. Like, yes, there's more parity in the league. You can get away maybe with not having to be a 60 plus win team, but like, in order to make a deep run, but you still got to be amongst, like a 53, 55 plus win team to win a championship. And I just think that there's other teams that are better. It's tough because Giannis, when healthy, I mean, this year will be, I think, the best player in the East, but it doesn't matter because I don't think the team's good enough. And we've already seen that. Like, we've already seen the Bucks go out 3 straight years in the first round. Yeah, there were injuries involved for sure, but we picked the Bucks actually to beat the Pacers last year, even knowing that Dame probably wasn't going to play, because we were like, Giannis is going to have a monster series that Indiana can't mess with, and he did. But no one else really played good enough, and I think that's going to be the issue for them.
Yeah, these guys just continue to get rage baited over and over and over. And we also need to address the last part of that comment where he said that this Milwaukee Bucks team is an upgraded version of the Pacers team from last year.
I think that's what he was trying to say.
I know that's what he was trying to say, but that is the most disrespectful statement I think I've ever heard involving the Indiana Pacers from last season. You need to respect what they were able to accomplish, right? They're a deep team, unlike yours, right? Your team has Giannis, Miles Turner, and that's pretty much it, right? Indiana, they have guys that they can go to, 8 and 9 man rotation, sometimes even 10. So we need to cut that off right there. But that comment is wild.
Well, again, as I've said many times, let us know your thoughts in the comments about what we've talked about so far in the show today, right? This pretty much is the end of it. And again, if you leave a comment on any of the shorts or videos, we'll read them as we just did. And of course, if you want to join in on the IG, do that as well. Go to any of our socials at the OBT Podcast. The polls are on IG, but we still post on the other socials as well. And continue to like and subscribe because, again, as I've said, for the last month or so during this offseason, we've had a lot of growth here in terms of getting a lot of subscribers. We're getting at least a few every video or every short that we're putting out. So we appreciate all that because this is a pretty rough time for content in the NBA right now. So, we appreciate what everybody's doing to support us. So check us out. Continue to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next episode.